This presentation, those who have watched online the presentation in Gonzaga, this one's different. The one at Gonzaga Hate Studies, I focused a lot about the use of different uses of art. This time we're going to talk about learning from other countries about the crimes of their past and connect it and ask you to be thinking about imagining this connection between owning the crimes of the past and our spiritual teachings around repentance. So this is going to go from Iceland to Germany to New Zealand. So how we came to create the sabbatical, thought that might be a curiosity for some folks of how did we come up with this idea? It took us 3 years. And many of the folks here worked on that project. Jan and Wayne, I see others who helped write the sabbatical and rewrite it. Are you in the room? So you can talk to these two more about what that meant and how we rewrote it 3 years in a row. And it was during COVID. So it took a while to also be able to do something related to sabbatical. The sabbatical was built with the idea of using the Lilly Endowment Clergy Renewal Program because that allows for a sabbatical for the pastor to go off and be renewed and invigorated, and also a sabbatical for the church where you get in somebody who can work with the church to look more at who we are and what we do. And a lot of who we are and what we do was part of the effort towards this sabbatical. So this church already is one that goes to Pride March and are there with lots of times. We've been there with a booth, the MLK March. We have a blessing box for those who are in need, be it hats in the winter or sunscreen in the summer. During the month of February and years like this, all through Lent, we have every Sunday something about Black history. Either in the past, we've done Black history related to the heroes and people we admire from Black history, or this year we did that plus extended it through Lent with our discussions about personal experiences with racism. We collaborate with Mardi Gras in getting feminine hygiene and underwear and bras for our homeless women. We collect food and diapers for Vanessa Behan, connected with our church life, especially around Epiphany. In our tradition, in Epiphany, the wise ones bring gifts to the child, and so we bring gifts for the children. So the Christian practice of repentance, this presentation is an invitation to reflect on our spiritual practice of repentance and the way other countries have owned the crimes of the past and how this is connected. This is an opportunity to imagine. So if you don't have something to write with, maybe I should get you something or somehow jot down some notes for yourself, because I'm hoping you'll do some imagining through this about what we can do in our communities about owning the crimes of our past. So what we plan to cover, what I plan to share with you, and hope you'll capture some of your ideas and imagination. I thought probably it would be a good idea to give a brief description of faith leaders and leaders of conscience, because that is a ministry of our church and was a major part of doing this sabbatical. And what it was to create this interfaith and non-faith coalition to respond thoughtfully and quickly, and that's really important for this group, thoughtfully and quickly to racism, poverty, violence, and ecological devastation. There are some folks from the faith leaders and leaders of conscience who are here. Would you raise your hands? So church, these are some of our leaders. These are actually members of the planning committee. So they have the inside on everything we do. Please talk with Kay, Lonnie, and Pam if you get a chance. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit, hopefully very briefly, to give you an overview of FLLC. Then I want to talk to you about the 3 core principles, which actually connect very much to what this church is. That is about showing up, surrendering ego. That is, don't worry about who gets the credit, get the job done, and risking failure. And the third section, you'll hear some examples of how other countries use public spaces to own the crimes of their national and local past, which again, I'm framing with this idea for us about spiritual practice and that practice of repentance. So the story of developing an interfaith and unfaith coalition to respond thoughtfully and quickly to racism, poverty, violence, and ecological devastation. It started sort of kind of a little bit in 2017 when I had attended a meeting for the Poor People's Campaign. It really took off in January 2018 and beyond. You'll remember as a church, we had to cut my hours by 20% and my salary by 20% because we weren't able to meet our budget. So the ideal was that I was going to use that 20% more time to grow my photography business. And the world went into chaos, and all my time went into this program of gathering together faith leaders and leaders of conscience to be a moral voice in our area. Using the Fig Tree resource guide, I sent out emails to different faiths, people of non-faith, and all I did is I put in the subject, faith leaders, gathering faith leaders and leaders of conscience. That was never supposed to be the idea for a name, that was just the purpose. So technically we still don't have a name, but we still have a purpose. We write op-eds, we gathered people together to watch The Sultan and the Saint, a movie, any kind of multimedia panel discussions we've done. We started Truthful Tuesdays when we found out about 4 of the 7 members of the Spokane Valley City Council were allies and regular attenders to Matt Shea's events. And so we began to speak out by holding vigils in front of City Hall. And then we started giving Leader of Conscience awards and the microphone to the people who had blown the whistle on Matt Shea's biblical basis for war. We wrote op-eds and emails about how the Christian tradition is not for war. We gathered people together of differing faiths and conscience for our Earth vigils. These happen every 6 months. All these different ways to try to engage with our community. And then on February 2021, Temple Beth Shalom suffered yet another defacement and desecration. So our little planning team got together. We were also recognizing the news about the Asian women and their co-workers who were murdered in Georgia and the killing of the shoppers in Colorado. It was all happening at once. And so we were gripped with a sense of helplessness, a sense of grief, isolation, and fear. The sense was we got to try something else. We have our vigils, we write our op-eds, we gather panels together. What else can we do? How can we get people together across the divides? So we came up with this idea of creating contests where if we could have an art contest, and the art contest would be about making an image that, and we came up with the idea of celebrating curiosity. It had to be an image that involved all kinds of different people of all different faiths, all different abilities, all different walks of life. And what we would do is we would put up a gallery and we would get families, because if your kids entered a drawing, or if grandma or auntie or uncle or somebody, we could get families together to look at a safe thing, a beautiful or compelling image, and get conversations going. COVID wasn't done with us, so we did get to put up the gallery. Pam helped us at the Hunting Crest Gallery. Remember we were putting up the gallery there, and then we did have our story contest. This was the idea, if we could own our blunders, if we could own our mistakes and write stories about how the mistakes in our lives transformed or changed our direction. If we could read those stories to each other, couldn't we all just go, yeah, I was an idiot and I learned from it? Wouldn't that be great if we could just own those stories? We did have our contest, and we did have our winners from that contest. And then as COVID was still not done with us, and then also with the coming of my sabbatical, we didn't get to the photography contest, but that may still come. Currently, what we've been doing, we've had our Vigil for the Healing of Earth's Waters. I've just written an op-ed. I'm told that it was supposed to be in the paper this week or sometime soon, that is written with faith leaders and leaders of conscience. What happens, those of you, some of you in the church leadership get these emails too. So you see how this goes. I send out a draft email, folks send me back stuff, I send back. So you have to be willing to receive at certain times a whole lot of email stimulus as it goes back and forth, and then we finally agree. So that letter has been accepted by the Spokesman Review and should be in soon. I had the great honor of being at the Holocaust observance at Temple Beth Shalom as the convener of faith leaders and leaders of conscience to light the candle for the righteous of the nation. I have never been so nervous. All I had to do was light a candle, but they're the ones that resisted, the people of non-Jewish background that took and hid folk, or the pastors who stood up. These are my heroes, and just felt the weight of them in the huge honor to do that. So we were able to be represented there. And we've recently been talking about the support of the Chinook people and Duwamish people to have their First Nation recognized. And again, in the corner there about the healing of Earth's waters. Our next vigil for the healing of the earth will be in Idaho, and that will be in October, somewhere near the Feast of St. Francis. That gives you a real quick idea of this ministry of our church. It started with this this time I had because we changed our work schedule. Then as I came back into being able to have full-time ministry here, the faith leaders and leaders of conscience became absorbed as a ministry of Veradale United Church of Christ. That became important when I brought it to the church council because people wanted to contribute funds, and I didn't want to have funds without having an agency that would oversee us. So this church became that agency and adopted this as our ministry as a church. Some of the core goals or the core values in our participation as faith leaders are also the values of this church. So the first one is to show up where other people are, be it in the Liberty Lake City Council meeting, at City Hall, the library, here at this church. For events like this, we show up for each other. These images are from the May 16th, 2022, Free the Snake River event in the totem pole journey. We showed up just to be there. We didn't need to have anything to say. We just needed to be there to support the need to free the Snake River. So showing up, surrender ego, that is that it doesn't matter who gets the credit, let's just get the job done. This is really important, and part of the reason faith leaders and leaders of conscience can do this is because they are a ministry of this church. Among those who have to show grant writers and grant givers that they're successful, a lot of ego gets in the way because they've got to get the credit. So when an organization does something, they can say, well, we freed the Snake River, therefore give us more money. As faith leaders and leaders of conscience, we don't have to say that. We just say, whoever gets it free, good idea, let's help. The other thing is to risk failure. When you're on a grant program, or truthfully, little church, if we were in a different church, most humans are risk averse. And failure is not, except in electronics, in Silicon Valley, your failures are actually lauded. But in most other places, people don't want to admit they had a failure, even if they do learn from it. But risking failure, like trying those contests, to risk failure is to also risk success. And now for the third section. the section that we'll talk about the examples of other countries and how they use the arts and public spaces to own the crimes of their national and local past, and hopefully invite you to be thinking about imagining what this means in relation to the spiritual practice of repentance. Iceland. I was curious when I went to Iceland. Well, first I wanted to go to Iceland to photograph the aurora. And then because of the way COVID was still interfering with travel, I ended up in Iceland, not at the aurora season, but at the puffin season. Okay, so that's not a bad trade. So looking at what Iceland does, Iceland's electricity is 100% green. It is from geothermal, hydro, and wind. That gives them the opportunity to make a whole lot of other things almost free. I wondered, how do you feed your people when your year is so dark? So much of the year is in the dark. And the answer is have geothermal energy, and you can create these greenhouses that are the perfect temperature, perfect light, and make the perfect tomatoes, grapes, and other yummy food. Raspberries, strawberries. What else did we have out of the greenhouses? Good stuff. Also, Iceland interested me for the whole understanding of what climate change is doing and ecological devastation. The puffins, only half the puffins were actually mating that year and having their little families. They couldn't answer why. They have protected the puffins. Puffins used to be food for Icelandic folk, and the puffins are protected, but they weren't populating as normal. And then Iceland also rescues these belugas and have created an environment to take belugas out of the aquariums where they're made to perform tricks and such, and taken and rehabilitated them for the hope that they will be set free. I knew that when we went in August, the chance was good. Sometime in August, Pride was going to be celebrated. I found this tour. These folks got off a bus and they had a rainbow flag. And it's like, I got to talk to those people because I knew Pride was sometime in August. So I spoke to the woman at the lead and she said, oh yeah, it's today. This is it. And you should get to Reykjavik, she says. It's like 2 hours away. I said, do I have time? Oh, you'll miss the parade, but you'll get there for the big event, which is a stage with music and all these families come out. So off we went. Hannah was with me at this point and we raced off to Reykjavik. So what happens in Iceland is 2/3 of the nation, 2/3 of the nation show up for Pride. Imagine if we had 2/3 of our nation show up. The other thing they do, which I would love to do, but it's already been told to me that probably it's a bad idea. But if you like the idea, talk to each other about it. They have in the road a rainbow that goes to the front door of the church. And more than one church had that from the public road coming right up to the door of the church. Is that cool? I thought so. Anyways, so as you watch the families here in Iceland, very interesting. I was pointing out to Hannah these families, the way they were interacting, and I don't know if she caught it or it just seemed like they were sharing the duties of nurturing these children more equally than we do here. Well, there's a reason for that. Iceland gives both parents 4 months of parental leave, paid parental leave. So one parent gets 4 months, the next parent gets 4 months, and then the two parents decide who gets the last 4 months. But a full year of parental leave followed by childcare. This full year of parental leave, the second parent doesn't take the 4 months, they lose the benefit. So the nation has decided this is so important that we want you to do this. And the bonding between parents was very clear as I watched the folks at this event. The other thing that was interesting, Iceland's known as a great place for women. Now, you talk to the women there and they'll tell you Iceland could still be better. And what I experienced from the women who were on the Icelandic flight, from this woman who's leading her people and some other women who were tour guides, listened to them and talked with them as tour guides, and then talked with one of the farmers in her greenhouse. These were, in this country, they would be called very strong women, which is usually a put down towards most women. And it usually means you're too masculine. And so talking to these women, I was very aware of their authority. They have a strong sense of their own authority. And part of this may go back to the economic collapse and how the old boys collapsed the economy of Iceland and the women rescued the economy of Iceland. I don't know. When I talked to one of my colleagues at the World Council of Churches later in the month, she said, we're just women being women. And I thought, I want that bumper sticker. I thought that was great. Icelandic women, they're not strong women. They're actually just women being women. Why can't the rest of us do the same kind of thing? Iceland, in that terrible weather, paints their buildings, has outdoor, what I call outdoor museums. There's these long discussions about what happened in that place. It's outside, it uses a lot of photographs. They're in two languages, the Icelandic language and English, images of the history of what happened there at this place. And you don't have to go in a museum to learn it. This became, and you'll see it, it repeats in the other countries. Let's do this here. How would you imagine us doing this here? Another thing that I appreciated about Iceland that is repeated in Germany is the matter-of-fact way language is used. So when the Vikings came and settled Iceland, no one was there. So they didn't take over someone else's land. They were the people that started the settlements in Iceland. They were also people who pillaged and plundered as part of their economic model. And we talk about it. Yeah, we did that till around 1066. Didn't work. We gave it up. Man, that's pretty good. Yeah. Imagine the ways. Well, how would we matter-of-factly own the history of our past and say, yes, this happened, we did it, people got hurt from it. We don't do it anymore. Germany started with Berlin in my experiences there. And in Berlin, the outdoor museum idea is everywhere. So in the center top image, you see this glass board. On it are, again, photographs. There are at least two languages, German and English. Very often it's German, English, French, and Russian that are on all of these monuments. This one where it's clear, there's photographs, what was there at the time of the Nazi regime, and you're looking through the glass to what is there now. You can also, there are several places where it's multi-sensory. So you may just come to a box where you can press a button and it will talk to you in your language. In this case, it's about Niedersachsen, about the state of Niedersachsen and what that's about. Other places, they have models for those who are visually impaired, so you can see what this image is that other people can look at. You can feel the image as in a model to know where you are and what is being memorialized there. A lot of use of these boards, maps, diagrams. People ask me, did you get to see Hitler's bunker? You don't get to see Hitler's bunker. They intentionally, this is East Germany at this point. East Germany did this, some say better than West Germany, of destroying anything that would be considered a place of pilgrimage for the alt-right. The bunker was destroyed so it wouldn't become a pilgrimage site. It is a parking lot, and that's pretty cool. You can look at what was there, but when you look out over this board, what you see is a parking lot. Then there's the monument to the murdered Jews of Europe. This is right downtown in Berlin, a city block, a huge piece of very, very valuable real estate. People have different feelings about this monument. There's all these big stones, all different sizes. The path is rough. It's a dangerous stumble. You can stumble on this path. And it is right across from the park, so you cannot miss this if you're in Berlin. And what it does is it really needs to be an experience. You walk through there and you can see in the picture where there's a person down the pathway and another person just starting to turn. You look again and they're gone. And that feeling, it's a very powerful experience to just be there and watch people going through this, and that sense of they were here, they're gone. They were here, they're missing. So this is outdoors, taking a prime piece of real estate. You can't miss it. And then there's a place where you can go underground to see more artifacts. What I was interested in was, what are these pieces that are completely, you can't miss them, they're accessible, you trip over them. Across the street, just a little ways into the park, there's a similar shaped monument. It's bigger, but it's similarly shaped. And this is the monument to the murdered LGBTQ folk of Germany. Are they like such a building that they're thanks. If you can write down your question, because I want to get through this all before questions. So write those down, but I'll answer you now. These are made, they've made these stones, and they do have the weight of them. It's a lot of weight that is there. This one, it looks like stone, it feels like metal. It's similar in design and shape as the ones at the murdered Jews of Europe's monument. This one's to the LGBTQ. What makes this one different is you have this little hidden space where you have a film on loop of same-sex couples kissing. What was the artist thinking? I'm not sure about how that kind of sneaking into people's private life, that feeling of looking through and turning people in. I'm not sure. These two dads have brought their kids to, I just happened upon them while I'm in the park, and they've got their kids and are showing them. And I don't overhear them saying anything to each other, showing them this monument. When the wall first went up in East Berlin, the dead zone hadn't yet been created. And I'll tell you more about that. That's a zone from the wall between East and West Berlin, and the dead zone becomes this territory in that it goes further into East Berlin, that if you cross over into it, you will be killed. At this point, there's the wall and there's this government building, and the Holzapfel family make a plan to escape. I love the way graphic novel art is used to tell the story. You don't have to go into a museum to learn this story. It's right on the sidewalk. You can't miss it. And it's a graphic novel. How fun is that? Telling the story about how they escaped by making a zip line from the top of the government building across to family, and they'd snuck notes over to the family, their family on the other side of the wall. And from things like this, the dead zone was created. One of the ways Berlin tells the story is to use what's there. I think about this for us and like to hear your imagining too about right in that place. The story is told. This is called a topography of terrors. Germans use this kind of language a lot, similar to Iceland, in just really harsh language, telling the truth about the past. The topography of terrors is this long outdoor museum of images, stories, maps on the wall, on a piece of what is left of the wall, and talking about the propaganda of the time. In the back is a museum. If you go inside, the museum is amazing. It's full. It's got so much information. What I'm curious about is how do we take and make history accessible to everyone? And actually, more than that, make it unavoidable to everyone. This was another monument. Underneath these statues is a description of how people were defiant and hopeful in getting to the other side of the wall. The dead zone is what you see in this photograph, and it's huge. It's a full, probably 2x3 photo of this location during the time when the dead zone was active. And what many of the monuments say is something to the effect of the frank discussion on Germany's past is one of the, oh, excuse me, let me move this so you can see it. The major achievements of our political culture and the foundation of understanding ourselves as a nation in free Europe. That's going to be repeated on some of the other monuments. Especially repeated is going to be, this happened here. And not only the leaders of the town, but the people of the town were complicit. Still in what used to be East Germany, this was an uprising on June 17th, 1953 of the laborers against the German government and the Russian occupiers. Over 100,000 people rallied in that environment, asking for fair wages. 39 died. And these crosses line up along a fence gate where you walk by, just headed to, be it to City Hall or to the Brandenburg Gate or other places. It's just on the sidewalk. And you can't miss it to retell the story of what happened during the time of the Stasi. It's told in photographs, it's told in story, and with fresh flowers. I found that really interesting. Someone is taking care of this memorial to put out fresh flowers. Here's something I'd love to hear your imaginations about. This was one of my favorite places, even before I'd gone into it. This is the German Resistance Memorial Center. It's a museum. Outside the museum, you get bigger than life photographs of people who resisted the Nazis. When you go inside, you can read their letters, you can read about the underground, you can read a whole lot inside. But if you're outside, you can't miss that this was part of what happened. And I wonder in this country, if we had a museum of the resistance, if that might not also show some crossing over divides in our country. Imagine if the Quakers were there and Harriet Tubman and people who have resisted the changes in voter registration. Who all would you put into the American version of a museum of resistance? Now, as we go through this presentation, we're going to do some more stumbling. The Stupelsteine, these stumbling stones, were created by an artist. His name is, let me get it correct, Gunter Deming. Gunter Deming in 1992, on the 50th anniversary of Heinrich Himmler's order to deport the Sinti and the Roma, he laid the first of these concrete stones that have a brass plate on top. These are stumbling stones that are embedded into the ground in front of a historic place where this person lived, worked, thrived in their time before the Nazis. Currently, there are 90,000 stumbling stones laid in 26 countries, European countries, making them the world's largest decentralized monument to the Holocaust. This one says, here practiced as in medicine, Julius Latte, born 1896, deported 1943, so he's about 74, this doctor, when he's deported. He died in Theresienstadt. Anyone sent to Theresienstadt was tended to be old or tended to be very young. They tended to be the people that couldn't work, and they were sent there to die, and he did. You'll notice when I bring up the stumbling stones, I'm also going to bring up the location. So this is now a place where there's a business, but that's where he had practiced medicine. On to Goslar. Goslar is a UNESCO historic site. So these buildings, it's walking into a museum. And while the young people have made this painting near, I'm assuming it's the young folk, have made this painting near the railroad station with the old house and the rainbow garden. It says, a young city with an old heart. What I saw for some of the young people that I could see they were together and they were kind of hanging out. But when you live in a museum, there are limits to how well this can nurture a young person's life. This was a place where they had mined silver for 1,000 years. The Romans had a castle here because the Romans had come and taken silver back to Rome. It had been a place of producing silver. I wanted to know, how did they do that without polluting all their waterways? And could that tell us something about our Bunker Hill mine that comes down polluting with lead and arsenic and other heavy metals all the way down here to the Spokane River? So I wanted to find out, how did they get around that? Well, I went up to the mine and there's this amazing mural, covers a wall as big as and as wide as our church, about life in the mines. And it turns out that they did pollute the waters. And what they have done, not here at this site, 100 years into mining, they noticed that the water was making people sick. So after 100 years, they said, oh, the water's making people sick. Tell everybody to stop drinking it. Right there, we're already ahead of this country. Stop drinking the water. Then they hollowed out logs and made wooden pipes that went from the top of the Harz Mountains and brought down fresh glacier water into the fountain in the middle of the city. Now, the rich people actually got pipes, wooden pipes, right to their homes. The poor could go to the fountain in the middle of the city and get water they could drink. Okay, but they've got all this polluted water. What are they going to do with it? Well, that came down through a different system, and that system powered mills to use the energy for whatever they needed, be it making grain or making energy for whatever project they had. I found this interesting. So most glockenspiels that I've ever seen tell the story of a fairy tale. This glockenspiel in Goslar at 12 and 3, just twice a day, the statues come out, they're all mechanized, there's music. They tell the story of the settling of the city and the history of mining. It starts with them going off with a torch into the mine, and it ends with electrical equipment in mining. And I wondered, this could be a cool art project for like the engineering class at EWU or someplace. How could we tell the story in a way, I don't know if we'd have a glockenspiel, but you can see the idea of a mechanized, interesting something that actually gets people to sit down and relearn the story when it comes to stories of our own history. stumbling stones. These are in Goslar. So every city I would go on a pilgrimage to find these. It wasn't always easy. And it was very, very moving because I would have to search for these. I'm out in the rain. I am determined I'm going to find this family. And I do. They're in the rain. That was the place where their home was. I don't know that that was their home. So here lived Hans Peter Jacob, born 1935, deported 1945. Did you catch his age? He's 10 years old. Theresienstadt, he's freed. Here lived Charlie Jacob, born 1890, forced into labor in 1939. What happened? The Nazis wanted silver. The mine was pretty much depleted at this point, but they forced into labor people to go down in the mine and get whatever silver might be left. He was sent to a labor camp. He was deported in 1945 to Theresienstadt. He was also freed. Here lived Manfred Jacob, 1933, born 1933, deported 1945, another kid, to Theresienstadt. He was freed. Now this next one, so here lived Emma Jacob. Emma was probably the wife of Charlie. Emma's birth name was Schrader. She was born 1898. She was marginalized by the community. She was bullied by the community. She survived. Wow. Wow. Another favorite. When you look at art, and especially some of the old art, it gives you an opportunity to ask more questions. Now I'm in Leipzig and I'm looking at the Hall of Princes. They wouldn't let me take my camera into the museum. I actually had to get a key and lock up everything. I was like, I don't take flash pictures. No, can't do it. So this is the best I could get of Prince Maurice von Wetten. So Maurice is a Black man. And there are pictures of him with his brothers who are also Black. They are Germans and they are princes of Saxony in 1553. Sometime later, about 200 years or so, pictures of Maurice von Wetten start showing up as a white, red-haired man. And they create a story about how Maurice he so admired Saint Maurice, who was a Black man, that he had himself painted as a Black man. I'm not buying it. So this one needs more research, but I just absolutely, he was called by his neighbors, some of the texts call him swarthy. It wasn't that he was Black, he was swarthy, which meant he was Black. Also in Leipzig, very interesting, this church. So St. Nicholas Church, in the midst of the Stasi and the oppression that was East Germany, this little, well, it's not so little, this church is having rebellious prayer days, and how the importance of the news media coming in was essential to being able to have these in mass, in large groups, because when the press would come, the Stasi wouldn't disband them and take them away. So the free press, the importance of that to getting the word out about what was happening in East Germany is a part of the truthful history of Leipzig. Another part is this person lived in front of, this is right across from the church, the white building with the little blue sign on it. The stumbling stone is closer to the road than to the door. And this says, here lived Ernest Levesque, born 1893. He was part of the Pastors Emergency League that was formed, and he was part of that since 1935. So this is the Protestant pastors who formed a league similar with Dietrich Bonhoeffer and other pastors who formed together an emergency league to address the abuses of the Nazis and to be a resistance to this. He was captured many times. In 1944, he was forced into labor and he was taken to the labor camp at Osterode and he was freed and survived. In this image, look at the red church on the left side of the image. You see that big red church, St. Mary's Church. This is in Würzburg. It's a really fun place with its college and young folk, especially on that bridge where you see all the people passing through there. Where this red church is, it was built by a prince bishop. In the day, if you were a prince, you could buy your bishopry? Your what? That. You could buy yourself your title as bishop. And so he builds the church. But before he does that, in the 1200s, this was the Jewish quarter. And it was a thriving Jewish quarter. This was the place of highly educated Jews. This was a place you would come to study and become a rabbi. It was a really important part of Würzburg's heritage. In 1298, however, this idea of purity went through town, and in 1298, 841 Jews were killed, murdered in Würzburg, which greatly reduced and scattered the community that was there. By 1377, so approximately 80 years later, this prince bishop has put the church on top of the former foundation of the synagogue. This prince bishop has destroyed the graveyard. And what has happened is people have gone back and found these gravestones, and it's become the largest museum of Jewish gravestones from the year 1100 to 1300. So there's a sign in front of the church that describes what happened. It tells it in detail. There's a sign on the church that says, this is the place where the graveyard in the synagogue once stood. The sign in front of the church describes what happened as far as the thriving community, how that community lived. Now it's a market for the farmer's market out beside the church. What they don't tell you, and I was really interested, I was asking people, well, what about the witch trials? The city that killed the most children, women, and men as witches was Würzburg. There were no signs about it. So I go to the library, and the library is the building right behind the St. Mary's Church. I go to the library, and librarians know everything, Charlie, right? Absolutely. 1625 to 1631 was when these women, children, and men were murdered as witches. And the librarian's like, yeah, I've heard something about that. Let me see what I can find. She went away for probably 30 minutes and came back with 2 books. This is all I could find. And so they got, even though there's some of the crimes of the past that are owned, when you have a long past, you have more crimes to own, and this is one of them. This old building is its own form of resistance. And I thought about, can you imagine what we could put on buildings, how we might decorate a building, what we might write on a building that would be its own form of resistance. So it's a pub, and it says, welcome here, Jewish, heathen, or Christian, if you have thirst. So if you got thirst, come here, doesn't matter who you are. This is Würzburg. I know it's way, way up high. This has got to be 30 feet off the ground, but they've written this up at the top there by the roof. I don't know if that helped to keep it from being defaced, Or if they just like, oh yeah, that's old Hans's place. Don't go there. Or how they did that and got to keep it. I don't know. Another stumbling stone. Here lived Julius Hirsch, born 1902, taken in prison. This is arrested on the 17th of July, 1935, died in the cell on that same day. You can bet. He's a young man and was probably beaten to the point that he died in the cell on that day. Man, some of these just really, some of them really hurt. I was looking at these two. This is still in Würzburg. Here lived Selma Helena Sigmund. She was born a Prager. That was her last name at birth. She was born in 1877, deported in 1943, murdered in Auschwitz. You'll see a lot of this, of murdered in. If they died there, like in the jail, it would be they died, or in Theresienstadt, died there. But when they are killed, shot, gas chamber, all the others, they use the word murdered. And she was murdered. And beside her is probably her sister, Hier wohnt Kunigunda Prager. She was born 1880, deported 1943, murdered in Auschwitz. So I'm looking, this is their place. It's under this little cover. I've got my camera, I'm looking down. And this woman, probably in her 70s, she comes up and she whispers to me, "Do you know what you're looking at?" And I say, "Yes." She goes, "That's from," maybe she didn't hear me say yes, but she goes, "That's from the time," and she looks over her shoulder and she looks over the other way. She's like, "That's from the time of the Nazis." And people here don't like to be reminded of those times because it hurts. And she said, "But some things need to hurt." And it really, really struck a chord for me of when we're thinking about, when you imagine where there are places in our local area, our national area, the avoidance of the truth of our past because it will hurt. It's precisely we need the truth of our past because some things need to hurt in order to keep our common humanity. Now, another thing, as I'm standing there and I'm looking down with my camera, one of the things the artist who designed these designed them specifically so you would have to look down at them in a sense of prayer or repentance, that you have to bow your head when you read these signs. So another part of why Würzburg hurts about the death of so many is between 1941 and 1944, Würzburg was a site of deportation. Now, the dehumanizing of the Sinti, the Roma, the Jews, the LGBTQ, all of that had started in 1933. So by 1941, their system is really well in place, and specifically towards the Jewish population by putting them separate from the community, not allowing them to have their jobs, bullying, as in the family that you saw from Goslar. This is the site of the deportation, and the sign there, among the signs you see, there's 5 of them with pictures and descriptions. And it says right there, the townspeople and the leaders were complicit in this. In Nuremberg, there's a sign that says, "We think about those who did not return and from the war and those who are still missing." The city of Nuremberg, 1952. One of the families I visited with their uncle was a prisoner of war in Russia, and it was so cold and the conditions were so bad that when they finally brought him some soup, the hot soup cracked all his teeth. So he came back from the war with all his teeth broken. Susan Nyman writes about this. When you're talking about the war, everybody suffered. The Germans have a saying, everybody suffered in the war. Some people suffered more, and it's our fault. It's not that the Germans didn't suffer. Yes, they did. And they were prisoners of war and they suffered brutality. But some people suffered more, and it was the Germans' fault. Imagine to hold that expression in this country. One of the churches had an art exhibit, and I was really taken with this particular sculpture and the sense that you could be in prayer and with the pain that is expressed in it. Sometimes you would see these outside as well. Wanted to add it to this part of the story, just in the sense of what are the other ways that we can express the pain and the suffering that we've caused in our history. Another stumbling stone in front of this business now. This was the place that Sidonia Stern lived, born 1884, deported on the 29th of November, 1941 to Riga. I don't know if you know where this is. She was murdered there. It says she was murdered. This is a 16-hour car drive from this location to the place where the concentration camp was, where she was killed. And by train, it had to be so much longer. A very wide space that was used for the systematic murder of Jews, particularly during this time. Riga is in Latvia. Nuremberg also has the museum. You have to go inside for this museum, the Museum of the Trials, the Nuremberg trials. They were redoing the actual trial hall. Interesting that they had the story of the photojournalists and how important this was to telling the story, keeping a record of what was happening. These images are next to each other. So the story of the photographers and the journalists on one side, and the story of the soldiers, the American soldiers who are keeping the German criminals in custody. To me, automatically, you notice that the photographers are all white and most of the guards were black. The question of privilege comes even as I look at this. Dachau. Dachau is just north of Munich. So I was staying in Munich, but traveling up to visit Dachau. Dachau was the first concentration camp the Germans built. It was built in 1933 and took its first prisoners in 1933 and were mostly political prisoners at this point. It was a labor camp as well as a political prisoner camp. The camp held 200,000 people. 40,000 died here. The place you didn't want to go was to the infirmary. That's where they did a lot of experimentations on people. The next building behind that was the clergy. They had taken particularly Catholic clergy who were resistors, and they'd separated the Christians from the Jews in their camp. And I didn't know that the clergy, they particularly like to do some of the experiments, the health experiments on these clergy, particularly around to hypothermia and altitude sickness, and many of them died. So 200,000 people here, 40,000 who died. the memorial at the crematorium, it gives you a command. So when you walk up to this stone, it says, think about how we died here. Really, it wasn't how many people died, or it's like a voice of those who have died saying, pause for a moment, think about how we died here. And then further on, there's this other monument, and this one doesn't give you a command. This one tells you why it's built. It says, to honor the dead, to warn the living. Karlsruhe, now I'm at the place where we have the World Council of Churches. And Karlsruhe is also a young city. Oh my gosh, everybody bicycles in Karlsruhe. There were thousands of bicycles everywhere, but I could not find the story of deportation. This train station was used as a deportation station. So I asked the mayor, because I was part of the press for the World Council of Churches, I got to cuddle up to the mayor of Karlsruhe and asked him questions on environment and what were they doing. Really interesting answers. One related to the deportation of the Jews was, yes, there's a marker there. It's at the end of the train station. It's like, really? Yeah, just keep looking. Okay, so I go. Ask some of the coffee sellers, have you seen this? Oh, I think it's further down. It's way down at the end of the station, but really down at the end of the station. Unlike Würzburg, who has it right up almost next to the door, you can't miss it. This one, you've got to be on the sidewalk walking to see it. It's there, however, and it tells again with maps, photographs, and languages, the story of how Karlsruhe was used in the deportation of the Jews. And especially between, 1940. So it starts in 1940 in this area. Really interesting about climate change here too. They're already heavily being affected by climate change. So the mayor told me that they are looking to replant the trees because their native trees in Karlsruhe are dying because of climate change. So they're already investigating because it takes a while to grow trees. Just a side note. Again, a pilgrimage to find in this city where these stumbling stones are and get a sense of where these people live. Albert Kuhn, born 1880, deported 1940 at about 60 years old to Gurs. He was dead June 5th, 1941 in Vernet. So he was taken to Gurs, but then he was taken to another. Hilda Kuhn, born here, so she is a wife, born 1885. She's deported 1940. She's about 55 years old. She's deported first to Gurs and then to Auschwitz. And she's deported in 1942, but they have all these question marks at the bottom of her stone because they don't know when she was murdered or died or freed. There's no record. Since there's no record of her, it was probably that she was murdered. Werner Joseph Kuhn, born 1919, deported 1940, so 21 years old, deported to Gurs and to Auschwitz in 1942, murdered September 25th, 1942. And Gunther Ledkün, born 1922, deported 1940, so he's 18 years old, deported to Gurs, then to Auschwitz, and no record of what happened next. My next stop in Germany was Hamburg, and Hamburg was a place where I was invited. One of my friends from Shavasti Abbey, one of the nuns from Shavasti Abbey, has gone to help this Buddhist community in Hamburg. And she found out while I was in Karlsruhe, she found out that I was headed towards Hamburg and said, could you come and give a conversation with us about interfaith relationship and working together? And I agreed, that would be great fun. our connection between Christianity and Buddhism is our teachings around compassion. This is a place where we very much connect in our work together. Carl Levi, now this is one that's very commonly seen and difficult to read. So here lived Carl Levi. He was born 1909. He was committed on April 16th, 1943 to Hellenstadt. That is a sanitarium in the city of Meseritz and Oberwalde. He was murdered less than a month later on May 5th. This was a person who had either physical or mental handicap. And so he's committed to an asylum and he's killed there. And they would call it, back to that image that I showed you of the Berlin Wall, and there's a museum behind it. There's a whole section about this murdering of the handicapped, the mentally ill. They also murdered their own soldiers if their disabilities were so bad from the war that they couldn't work as functional, and they called it mercy killings. New Zealand, yay, we're finally there. New Zealand. So when you come to New Zealand, one of the things that is, could we please copy this? The Arts Council, the National Arts Council that decides like, what is the decoration on the bridge that's going to be put up? You know how our bridges have flowers or patterns? They get to decide what is that's going on the bridge. They decide about the statues and the monuments and the parks and in the city. 4 members of that board must be Maori. They must understand the culture, the language, the history, and they must be. Wouldn't it be great if let's just take our cities and have at least 4 Salish speakers on every committee related to history, art, owning the crimes of our past. One of the results of that is this art installation. It's called the Kawati globes. These are describing parts of the Maori heritage. They're made by a Maori artist. They have images that describe Maori teachings, and they light up at night and shine on a wall of a building there. Even there, however, there's still crimes to be recognized and owned. So visiting the graveyard in Queenstown, I come upon, there's first a really interesting description. You can get a whole map of how the graveyard's laid out, where different churches, religions, faiths were. And you also get this section, one little tiny gravestone that's broken, written in, I believe it's Mandarin. It's one of the Chinese language. It could be a Cantonese language, I don't know. But one of the languages from China is on this gravestone, and all the land behind it are unmarked graves of the Chinese people who worked in the mines in New Zealand. There's a plaque that honors all those who died in the gold rush. I asked, where are their names? Has anyone worked to find their names? And the answer was, nobody knew. And because of the separation of the way peoples interacted, still don't know. Mining, again, because of our Bunker Hill mine, I was really interested in how other countries handled their pollution and devastation from mining. This mine in New Zealand was one for coal. It's at the top, this precipice of a very dangerous mountain, and they list the people who died trying to get coal down into the community. So there is a memorial of the names and the dates when people died at this spot. They also have this whole outdoor museum. Now, the problem here is you do have to drive to it. I was talking with a member of the Nimipu tribe, talking about the Appaloosa horses. And there is, I understand, there is an effort where the Appaloosa horses were slaughtered, that the Nimipu are building a remembrance there. But there's a whole long journey that got the Appaloosas there. People have to, like here, you have to go to the place. Maybe we could do something to mark places along the trail, as in the places where, in our situation, the Appaloosa horses were taken to their slaughter. There's also here, if you don't know about the story of the Appaloosas, there was a remnant of those horses that was saved. It was a relationship between a member of the Nimipu and a white person of what's now Rockford Valley Ford area that took in some of these horses and hid them so that that not all of them would be destroyed. That idea of remnant and the telling of the story. So here with the coal mining, you have to go to the location. This is the location where Captain Cook landed. Now, having Hawaiians in my family, Captain Cook is not a hero. And so going to the cove with Captain Cook, where he had come in, I came with my prickles up. And the Maori have strong influences as to how this memorial, this monument is placed. There's the Maori, right along with the English story, there's the use of images, drawings, photos to tell the story from then to now. And there are the statues. So you get a sense of the story being wider and broader than often is told in our culture. Okay, so I have hoped, I thank you for staying with me through all of that. I hope this presentation has been an invitation to reflect on how the spiritual practice, the Christian practice and spiritual practice of repentance can connect with the idea of owning the crimes of our past, how other countries have done it, how we could do it. As Christians, our faith offers us that transformative power of repentance in word and action. Repentance, unlike what has happened in a lot of our country where people say, I'm sorry, but they don't follow it up with action, that's not repentance, that's lying. So repentance requires both word and action. And learning from other countries with this practice of faith allows us to truthfully talk about our past and move towards a mature and hopefully towards a mature and healed society. So now I hope that you've had a chance to write a few things down. I think we're small enough. I thought about breaking you up into little groups, but time being what it is, you want to call out anything you've imagined from seeing this. Have you seen something that in your location or in our location we could do?